Welcome to our webinar on the California legal aid data and evaluation landscape. My name is Zach. I use he, him pronouns. And so for this 1 hour webinar, we will have a very brief summary of what our goals were for the project. And I'll briefly review 4 key takeaways from the report that I think are most relevant for today's discussion. We have a panel, a very good panel of folks focusing on data and evaluation at legal aid orgs across the state. I'll quickly go through them, and then they can also give a very brief intro when we get to them. So at this point, we have Christine Holmes from Bay Area Legal Aid, Shelby Knox from Community Legal Aid SoCal, Susan Vincent from LAFLA, and Peter James from EBCLC. After the panel, we'll hopefully have some time for a brief Q&A for myself and for the panelists. And then I wanted to share very quickly a few of LAC's websites and research and other stuff that we're also doing just to close us out. Yeah, I think that's enough with the table setting. I'm just going to go now into a little bit about our goals for the project and some of the key highlights before we talk with the panel. So as most of you know, I think from looking at the report, the main goal of the survey and the report itself was to get a sense of the landscape of data gathering and evaluation in our community in order to do a couple of main things, to both share within the community and the sector what organizations are doing and what they want to do when it comes to gathering data and utilizing it to drive service delivery choices and maximize impact with scarce resources, things like that, but also to inform LAC's own understanding of what the community is doing when it comes to these things in order to give us kind of a better sense of how we can provide a little bit more support and know-how and perhaps training to kind of leverage the community-wide knowledge that we have to, just to provide a space and a means to effectively navigate these kinds of issues, which we'll be talking about today. The key takeaway one that I wanted to address was that many orgs are already really strongly valuing data collection implementation. So they already see that there's a need and there's a reason and a rationale for engaging in this kind of work and prioritizing it. The key takeaway is that there's definitely room for improvement in terms of implementing change based on evaluation. So really using data to drive and kind of deepen and expand the ways that evaluation can be based on that data that's collected. So here we just see that there is interest and kind of a desire to engage in this work generally. The main motivation for organizations to do this stuff, to pursue data collection and evaluation, is actually to adapt and improve their services. So in this sense, we see data and evaluation as kind of being very critical to having an empirically informed approach to decision-making around everything from outcomes to outputs to just the way that organizations are thinking critically about how to use their resources and expend them in a way that feels strategic and kind of based on something tangible like their data. And the other main thing that's kind of really intertwined with this is being able to then communicate the impact and the value of that work. And so by having it as being informed by data, they can better utilize that information to then turn to funders or even through advocacy at the legislature, whatever it is, to better kind of bolster their claims and just kind of really demonstrate what they've been able to do. Thirdly, so this is kind of a little bit of a complicated one, but it just pertains to the fact that a lot of organizations right now are collecting data at the beginning of service provision and fewer are doing so at the end. And this is kind of interconnected with this other idea of what are all the survey tools at organizations' disposal to gather data. So I think that in the report and here, it just indicates that there's some more that for those organizations that want to, there's space to increase the use of things like surveys and interacting with data from partner organizations, client interviews, focus groups, all these other tools that are kind of out there. And whether that's kind of at the beginning or the end or way after, such as 6 months down the line, through a text message campaign, something like that. I imagine most audience members have heard of that. The point is just there are a lot of tools that folks in our community are using, and we kind of want to help, just maximize the resources and ensure that everyone is kind of aware of what their other organizational counterparts are doing in this space to collect data and then to use it to make sure it's practical and actually kind of helps advance their mission and their work and supports them. I know I'm going quickly, but I'm just hoping we can have plenty of time for the panel. The fourth key takeaway is that generally organizations already see a lot of room for improvement. It kind of ties back to the third takeaway, which is mostly that they want to do more interviews and surveys about outcomes and clients' experience. So this kind of just takes another step beyond the data collected at intake or whatever it is, as we'll hear from the panel, and kind of just taking that next step and seeing what's going on in the client's life and the case's lifespan at the case closure and beyond that, to really kind of get this holistic sense of how much work the organization has put in and how profound the impact is beyond just, the numbers of cases closed or something like that, kind of getting to that deeper understanding and having that, as I've said, inform service delivery and also kind of be part and parcel of the messaging around the service provision. So I know that was very quick, but I'm hoping that the panel can kind of illuminate more on the ground details of kind of these key takeaways. And they're also, of course, all in the report. Okay, great. So Christine will be kicking us off. Then we'll be going to Shelby, who I believe is on now, hopefully. Then Susan, and then Pete will close us out before the Q&A. Christine, do you kind of kick it over to you?
Sure, great.
Awesome.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So hi, everyone. And I just want to thank Zach and Lack for delving into this topic and getting us all together. I'm Christine Holmes. I am the Impact and Learning Manager at Bay Area Legal Aid. I've been at Bay Legal for 2 years, which is exactly how long the Impact and Learning team has existed. It falls under our general counsel's direction, and I work closely with our grants and contracts team, as well as our management team. So I'm going to briefly talk about data collection and data visualization, specifically as it relates to our case management system. And if you can go back to the first slide one really quickly, just wanted to share, I picked a few of these stats to share about Bay Legal that represent not only the depth of our organization, but some of the challenges that we face when it comes to data collection. The data that we collect and the collection methods have become a bit unruly over time, given our large staff that are separated into many different teams that are also separated geographically and with rotating cadre of volunteers. We had a case management system that no longer met all of our needs. So teams started developing their own systems, including a lot of different spreadsheets and Google Forms and other ways of collecting the data. And so our goal, and now we can go to the next slide, was to rein in all of Bay Legal's data collection into one main repository. And Bay Legal rolled out a new case management system in January 2021. And our case management system is called Justice Server. It's a Salesforce platform. And it was designed to not only track our intake and case and client data, but also track and run reports on other services that we provide, including outreach, presentations and trainings, and social work. Over the last 2 years, we've also added a clinic object to track clinic participant data, which includes demographics and the services that we provide to the clinic participants. We also integrated sending automated client surveys out via text. And most recently, we have been expanding on an object that we call case milestones for our SSI and integration teams. And this object allows our attorneys to more easily record important steps of the case that we can then run reports on instead of some of this important information just living in case notes or on individuals' calendars. And lastly, we also track what we refer to as projects. And this is, that wide array of activities that don't fall under any of those categories that I mentioned. And, one example would be external committee meetings. Next slide. So it's really great for the grants and contracts team and for my team, the impact and learning team, to be able to track and report on all of this data out of one system. But what is the added value for management and staff? And the answer for us is data visualization. So with Justice Server, I've been able to develop dashboards that will allow our management teams and staff to see in real time the impact of our work. As an example, for the management team, we've built a dashboard that helps, dashboards that help them track their staff's caseload, the level of service provided by each staff member, the average hours each staff member is spending on unlimited versus extended rep. We've also developed dashboards that display different data points for our clinics. That's including participation by the clinic date, participant demographics, and again, services provided. And we also started developing practice area dashboards, again, to show in real time the types of cases that we're closing. And for instance, our housing dashboard specifically highlights the number of nuisance and non-payment eviction cases that we've closed, and the outcomes of all of our housing cases, whether we won or lost the case, and other data points. And also, as I mentioned before, we started tracking case milestones. And so we created a dashboard to show the number of cases at various stages. For instance, in some of the SSI cases, we can see the number of cases in that initial application, the cases in reconsideration or request for hearing. And then we also are tracking the average time it takes for our client's initial application to get approved or denied, among other data points. Next slide. So what have we learned by using real-time data visualization? Well, it helps us more easily gauge if we're on track to meet our program deliverables. It also helps us identify in real time to fix any data entry issues. And sharing the dashboards has led to more conversations about what data points we want to review on a regular basis and what data points we thought might be interesting but turn out to be not that interesting or tell us very much. And understandably, when more people are looking at data in real time, it motivates people to get their data in the system in a more timely manner. So we know that we're looking at accurate numbers. And then for me in particular, I'm looking for problems. I'm looking to see if staff are using fields in a way that we didn't intend them to. If everyone seems to have the same general understanding of what a particular selection means versus another selection in a field. And this also helps me identify, the areas where we may need more staff training, or we may need to better define what our data is and what we're trying to collect through certain fields. And, because of this, we are continually trying to refine our data points and be very strategic about adding new data points to our data collection. And the next slide. So we have a lot of future goals, but I wanted to keep it simple. Also keep my own anxiety in check. So the first one is to complete a data dictionary, and this has been an ongoing project for me since I've began. We have just thousands of data fields in our case management system. And as we are refining the fields, one of the criteria that we're implementing is we're not going to add a field unless we have a clear definition for what that is. And that goes into documentation. So this data dictionary, the goal is to have a definition for all of our data points. And it's just another example of how we want to document, because it really helps us keep organized, and so that we don't run into the same situation where people are starting to develop their own systems outside of our main system. And then I haven't really talked a lot about the evaluation piece, and that's something that we want to really expand on now that we've been working on our case management system, and it's been rolled out now for 2 years, and we're ready to move beyond some of this initial work that we've been doing, and we'd like to figure out ways to get more client feedback besides our pretty short text survey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine. Shelby, I think you're up next. Sound okay?
Sounds great. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Huge thanks to Zach and Lack for this amazing report and for convening today's call, and mostly for supporting this evolving field that we're in. I'm really thrilled to be listening to my colleagues today too. Thanks so much, Christine. Shelby Knox, I'm the Grants and Evaluation Manager here at Community Legal Aid SoCal in the Development Department. We are outlined in blue here. We serve all of Orange County and a swath of Southeast Los Angeles County. And we've been doing some really interesting things over the past couple of years. I'm going to touch on them very briefly in case you're working on similar stuff and we should be talking. First of all, we're in Legal Server, and we started using Power BI, which is a Microsoft data visualization software, in 2021. We're finally starting to get our brains wrapped around the basics. At the moment, we primarily use it to see outputs, for instance, for grant reports and program stats, and we're really excited to get to the next phase with it. Second, our case managers have developed a survey that's helping us to study the impacts of case management supports for our legal clients. That was integrated in Legal Server in July. Third, we have an SMS survey that we send out via Legal Server to clients who receive legal advice. The responses are tied to their case records. So not only can we look at their satisfaction data, but we also can see it in relation to demographics, case type, etc. But what I really want to talk about today is our staff survey and give you a little bit of a case study, because I think it really illustrates how we're collecting actionable data and how my leadership team is using it to help drive our strategic and operational priorities. Next slide, please. All right, so in 2017, One Justice came up with our first staff survey, and we've kept a lot of those questions around as we've redeployed our staff survey about once every 3 years. The survey has about 30 questions that cover organizational culture and access to resources. It combines Likert scales, which is that 1 to 5 scale on the left there, with open-ended questions. The survey is 100% anonymous. The only thing that we ask from respondents is whether they're an attorney, a paralegal, or a non-legal staffer. We've been fortunate in, as we send this survey out more and more, we're getting more qualitative responses back, and I think that the level of candidness has increased as well. So that may be me in the top corner, maybe my executive director, maybe my director of legal services. We are a pretty geeky lot here, and we love a good survey. But I will say, as a cautionary tale, however, over the past 12 months, we've sent out probably half a dozen big surveys to our staff. So that's probably the look that they get when they see that survey in their subject lines. So we're on a bit of a survey detox right now. Probably won't do any next year big formal surveys anyway. The good news is that we have a lot of data to work with over the next couple of years, so we're excited about that. Next slide, please. So what do we do with this data besides make really horrendous graphics? And my apologies to your eyeballs. CLA SoCal has adopted a continuous feedback loop model. I know I'd have more fun talking about cool dashboards today, but this is really why we do this. As you can see, the model is a cycle that includes multiple points to gather data and communicate with staff as issues are being prioritized and solved. And then the cycle starts all over again. Next slide, please. You may have noticed that communicate with staff was on that loop several times. And here's one example of what that means for us. The slide that you're looking at right now has some data from my report that I presented during an all-staff call on our staff survey results earlier this year. First, we share the feedback from all the Likert scale responses, and we share comments with that come in through the survey that are anonymized, both positive and negative, to our staff. From these, I discussed common themes. For instance, this year, themes included general satisfaction with the direction that CLA SoCal is heading, as well as a desire for more professional and social connections between our substantive units, and an immense dislike for the PDF program that we use. On the right, you'll see that line chart that looks at the question, the statement, offices feel that they are working together to accomplish a shared goal. You'll see on the far left, which is 2017, that more people at CLA SoCal disagreed with this statement, the purple line, than agreed with it, the yellow line. So we've come a long way since then. But still, we know that we need to continue to improve on this metric because of our new hybrid working reality. So the moral of this story is that I firmly believe that we got our staff to spend several hours of their lives this year and participating in focus groups and responding to surveys because they feel heard. So on my last slide, let's look at how CLA SoCal communicates these issues and how they're being addressed. So even though we won't be surveying the next year, we will be explicitly linking this year's staff feedback with actions that we take in coming years. So these are some of the big themes that came across this year from our staff during these surveys. Some are obviously big issues. Compensation, right? It's a perennial issue on all of our surveys to date, and it probably always will be. As such, it is a perennial priority. Again, my leadership team works to be very explicit with how we link solutions we are pursuing, like living wage adjustments and non-cash compensation, back to staff feedback. Some are little issues, like creamer in the kitchens, low-hanging fruit of a deliciously creamy, chemically nature that makes some of us a little happier to come to work every day. So in conclusion, it's great having a leadership team that's enthusiastic about including data-driven decision-making in its toolkit. And I'm really thankful for that. To make that happen, it's been a process to build a culture of trust and transparency, and that's an ongoing process. And as well as staff understanding based on that improvement loop, which in turn is nurturing our evaluation culture. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shelby. That was awesome. Susan, let's go to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Vincent. I'm the legal IT manager at Lafayette Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. I come into this role from doing legal work and from managing legal teams. I kind of cut my teeth doing work internationally in some less resourced countries, and then at a very small legal aid with, at times one single myself paid staff member. And so I definitely understand the kind of limitations that we sometimes face when we're thinking about data and evaluation. But I also know how much is possible. If you look at the tools that you have and start thinking through how can we make the most of these, there really is a lot that you can do. And so I've got the tools that we use up here, and I'll go into those in a minute. But I wanted to briefly kind of preface this talking about, my perspective and where I'm coming from this. So I know we've heard, different perspectives on getting, surveys and case data and staff feedback. Really, one of the things that I like to focus on is data justice, specifically how it relates to our clients. There's a saying in the internet world that if you're not paying for the product, that you are the product. And we don't want our clients to ever feel like that we're kind of taking information from them kind of in trade for the services that we're giving them, and that we might be doing something with that data that's not to their benefit. And so I think that we have actually an ethical obligation to use that data that they're giving us in a responsible way to make the most of it, and that's part of our justice commitment to the community. And so you can see here, we do have a number of different ways that we collect this data. Like Christine mentioned, we try to get as much as possible into our case management system, which is Legal Server. We transitioned to Legal Server in 2020 in September. And because of that transition, we're able to get a lot more data out of our system. It was there before, but it required a consultant who had SQL knowledge, and it was just not something that was readily accessible to staff. And so now we try to get all of our legal work into Legal Server. Obviously, that includes cases, referrals, time tracking is all in there, outcomes, all of that is there. We do have occasional need for data from other sources. So that may be surveys, which we collect primarily in Microsoft Forms, or it may be something that we're doing for our partnership that's not actually case data. And so we, for example, lead the Stay Housed LA project, and maybe we want to provide referrals, but we don't want to actually put that information into Legal Server because we're not taking the case and we don't want conflict information. And so we do have another tool that we use, Power Apps, to kind of guide that data collection. And lastly, we use Zoom as our phone service. And so that's another source of data for us, for our hotline, for our calls that we're making out, to make sure that we can see what we're doing and then hopefully be able to determine if it's effective. And so that kind of left-hand side that you see there is all of our data input that we're working with. From there, we try to centralize it as much as possible into SharePoint, which is the data repository that we use. SharePoint is many things, and if you work with it, then you know that. But for this purpose, it is where we try to keep all of our data, both our kind of historic static reports, our backup data. If we were to suddenly lose access to Legal Server, we still want to be able to know what we did last year and be able to report on that. Or if someone accidentally went in and changed something, we want to have some kind of static report we're referring back to. And then you'll see that both Power BI and QGIS are the tools that we use to kind of visualize that data and make meaning out of it. And so if you want to go to the next slide, one of the things that the report that LAC put together asked about was, how do you make sure that your data is valid? What are you doing to help make sure that the data is entered consistently? And so this is an example that I mentioned earlier of a Power App specifically for our Stay Housed LA call center. It's a little bit out of date, so don't take it to be a representation of what our team's doing now. But this is built to both guide our receptionists in what they should do in each of these situations, and also to track what they did do. And so you can see that this screen kind of has the main categories of types of issues someone might call about. Maybe they're just calling for information. Maybe they got a notice from a court or a landlord. And so then there's buttons on the right-hand side to say what to do about all those issues. The last one is illegal lockout. And what you're supposed to do in that scenario, again, in the time that this was active, is to provide lockout information. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is actually what the staff would see when they click provide lockout information. They have the information on the left, and then on the right, you'll see that there are different options based on the time of day. Usually time of day is not that important, but in this scenario it was. And so what we actually did was we built in some data validation so that the person actually answering the call knew what to select and also could only select the appropriate option. And so in that scenario, we're both guiding the staff, we're providing contextual real-time information, and we're also, again, tracking that information so we can report it back to our funders and make sure that we're providing a good service. So you'll see that the kind of 9 a.m. to 11:30 option was grayed out here because the screenshot was taken at 11:49 a.m. So they can't actually do that anymore. Instead, they're prompted to give the information. And then if they click that blue provided information button in the bottom right, that interaction is logged and they're taken back to the home screen to begin another call. And so this is really the input side of things. It's trying to get as clean data as possible at the very, very beginning, so that, again, we have that to work with and analyze. If you don't have clean data, your analysis is going to be not very meaningful. And so this is one of the ways that we've tried to do that. If you go on to the next slide, this is an example of kind of the chart that we created in Power BI to represent that data that was put in by staff into that Power App. And so you can see generally, what types of things people were calling about, what was done, whether it was marked as an emergency. And so that's going to be kind of the visualization side that we're able to look at and say, what do we make of this? How do we need to prioritize resources based on the actual issues that our team is seeing? And this is for that very specific kind of purpose of that Stay Housed LA call center. But if you go to the next slide, you can see that we actually do this in general for our cases that come in for LAFLA in general. So the next slide is an example of one of our more recent dashboards that we created for our management team. And this is not any specific staffer, but you can see that at a glance, our management team is able to see, for any individual staffer that they select, how many cases were they working on in a particular range, how many new cases were opened, how many were closed, how many are still active at the end of that range. And what that allows us to do is, again, make sure that we're targeting our resources in a way that's effective. And so if you're not opening new cases, maybe you're not as accessible to the community as you should be. Maybe there's something going on that's keeping that inflow of cases from working as it should. Similarly, if you're not closing cases, maybe it's because you're trying to open too many and we're not giving you enough time to do the administrative work to close the case. And so there's a lot of information here that the managers can use, not just for kind of, is this person doing their job, but also to see if there's something that we can improve to make our work more accessible, more meaningful, and at the end of the day, more equitable for our clients. And all of this just kind of, again, pointing back to the first slide, all of this is pulling out of Legal Server, specifically the Reports API, and going into Power BI. And so what we've tried to do, again, if you go to the next slide, is to actually close the loop and embed some of these reports in Legal Server. And so this is data from Legal Server that got pulled out into Power BI and is now being presented back to our management team in line with the rest of their work. Again, the hope is that the closer the visualization is to the day-to-day work that folks are doing, the more likely they'll actually see it, look at it, reference it, and be able to use that in their decision-making. And so that's a quick overview of what LAFLA is doing with our data. We obviously use a lot more types of things. We recently completed a community needs survey. I did something very similar with that process, but we're really excited about what we've done so far. I think what folks have mentioned as being kind of opportunities for growth are very true for LAFLA as well. We want to include more community surveys, client surveys. We're currently in a project led by Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles and including the Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino, who I believe is on the call, and Mental Health Advocacy Services, to bring a texting survey into Legal Server and be able to send that out without needing an additional kind of third-party platform to do those surveys. So keep your eyes out. Hopefully that report about that will come out next year if you're interested in kind of replicating that. But you can also get in touch with me if you'd like to, and we'd be happy to discuss that further.
Amazing. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate that. Pete, you ready to close this out?
Yes, Yes, thanks, Zach. And yeah, thanks again to LAC for their work on this and setting up this webinar, and for all the other panelists. I've noted down things that I've heard from you all today. So it's good to sort of do this kind of sharing. So I'm Peter James. I'm Data Evaluation Manager at East Bay Community Law Centre. My pronouns are he and him. So we're a community law centre based in Berkeley and serve Alameda County in the East Bay, up in Northern California. And we are also part of the clinical program for Berkeley Law School. So we our practice areas have a big role in sort of training law students. And we work across 8 different practice areas: housing, immigration, a whole range of areas, and also have a social work team as well. I'm the data and evaluation manager at EBCLC. So that, you know, the report talks about, I think, how this type of work is structured and resourced in organizations. I think about a third said they had a dedicated person. So that we'd be an example of that. And my job is to manage our case management system. So we are using Legal Server, just like Community Legal Aid SoCal and LAFLA. And then I'm also responsible for data reporting, largely from Legal Server, and our evaluation work. So like how do we sort of organize this and think about this in our agency? I kind of think about it as sort of 2 streams of work, really. The data part, which is, you know, having that core data about the clients we're serving and the services that we're providing. I think one thing that we've really tried to do, I've been at EBCLC since 2020, is obviously, you know, we all have a ton of funder reports to do and spend a lot of our waking lives doing them. But we have tried to kind of move beyond just doing that to providing more sort of global reports about what we're doing as an agency, so that our staff, our executive team can really sort of look at our work in terms of our organizational goals and not just in terms of our obligations to particular funding streams. So that takes the form of monthly dashboards. Again, we use Power BI because it connects very easily to Legal Server. If you don't mind me doing so, Susan, I'll give a plug for Susan is arranging a sort of Power BI work group for legal people who use Legal Server, and maybe, I don't know if there's a way, Susan, you could drop in info for people who might not be aware of that, because we are one of the agencies, we don't yet have that interactive. So at the moment, I make that monthly and then send around PDFs. And so I am one of the people who would like to learn how to make that more interactive so people can engage with it more. And then we, you know, so we compile data monthly and annually, and also do ad hoc analysis, you know, depending on, you know, particular questions that arrive organizationally. And then on the other side of the house, we have evaluation. So where we're trying to understand more about client experience, the outcomes, the impact of work. I think probably the main thing that we've moved on in the last year or so has been to implement a cross agency standard client survey, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But like many of you, we also have evaluation that we do that is specific to particular projects and grants and all particular organizational questions. So that's kind of how it sort of shapes up for us. Zach, if we could move on. So, you know, I think client survey is probably one of the things which lots of us do or want to do. And one of the things we wanted to do, I think when we started this, we had a kind of a mix of surveys that had kind of arisen historically due to, you know, different grants asking us to do a survey, you know, initiatives in particular units. And so it wasn't really kind of consistent. And so what we wanted to do was bring something that could be standardized across the agency, and fill in gaps, you know, fill in gaps in areas of work where we weren't surveying clients and asking them about their experience. So we developed a standardized survey. We aim for it to be very short. So we have a kind of core survey with 3 really core questions, which you can hopefully see there on the screen. And part of the thinking there was, because sometimes there are grants that say, you know, you have to ask this question, was so that if our base survey was fairly short, we could, if we did need to, we could add other questions on. And so it wouldn't be a kind of awfully long survey for clients to complete. And kind of, I think Susan brings up a very relevant point there about kind of data justice. You know, we do really want to make sure that we're not asking clients to fill out like impossibly long surveys, and that we are actually looking at and using the information that they take the time to provide. So, you know, there's obviously a lot more to data justice, but I think just actually listening to what people say is something that we take very seriously, which actually is sort of related to the survey design there. You'll see it's actually skewed towards qualitative questions, which was, you know, there's decisions you can make when you create a survey. And we actually decided that we just wanted to hear very directly from people what they thought we needed to know. Especially since we were sort of revamping a survey, we wanted to just hear, you know, what comes up for people, what do they want to tell us about, and I'll touch on that in a minute. In terms of distribution, I think one of the things that has been important for us is automation. So we have a system where when the case is closed, unless some sort of exceptions apply, the survey distribution is automated from legal server. And I think that's been very important, both in terms of reducing staff overhead, in terms of not having people have to distribute surveys manually, but also to avoid gaps, right? Making sure that unless there's a good reason for it, we are actually asking clients for their feedback. So what we learned so far from our survey, we get about a 20% response rate. And I think that's something which we always try to bear in mind. So yes, we do get feedback from clients, but also it's only from 1 in 5 people we seek to survey. And so whilst we do try to learn and take account of what we're hearing, we also try to keep in mind that there are people we're not hearing from. And I think that's important to bear in mind with any kind of data, is what does it illuminate and what also is missing from the picture. And one of our surveys is distributed by SMS, because that practice area uses SMS a lot. And what in terms of their interaction with clients. And one of the very interesting things that was totally surprising to me was we found that we actually got complete and very constructive feedback via text. And this is sort of via individual text messages, which we just sort of thought we'd try it and see whether it worked. And we did, right? That we got full sentence with really useful feedback. And then in terms of, you know, what's the feedback telling us? I think that it wouldn't be a surprise to learn that, you know, people want, you know, obviously legal advice that they view as appropriate and helpful is obviously very important to people. But I think a theme I would highlight that really comes up a lot for us is listening and validation. People saying it was so important that, as this problem unfolded for me, no one was believing me, no one was saying, taking what I was saying seriously. And it was really important for me that that's what happened at your agency. And I think particularly because we're a law, involved in clinical legal education, sort of having that feedback to our attorneys about the work that they're doing in terms of trying to coach people on how they are working as lawyers, how they are interacting with clients is very important. So that was kind of one of the themes that has come out from the qualitative data. In terms of improvements, I think one of the things that has come up is regular updates, particularly on long cases that have long timelines and where they can kind of have periods of activity and inactivity. There is a demand from clients for regular updates. And I think that kind of the way I think about this is, when you buy something now, you get like 1 million text messages just to say that it's left the warehouse, it's coming to your door, it's at your door, right? People are used, are very accustomed to very regular updates, and so I think in terms of listening and acting upon the feedback that we are receiving, I think one of the things that I want to move forward and have not, this is definitely a work in progress, is to work with our programs teams to say, well, are there some structural things or technological tools that we can put in place that might be able to facilitate more regular updates in a way that wouldn't be too burdensome for you and would be beneficial and helpful for clients? And, I was interested to hear Christine talk about the project milestones. I could see some kind of tech tools like that might be helpful for making sure that we maintain that kind of regular communication that people are really looking for. So that's a little insight into our client survey, and close out on the last slide. So some future goals, interactive dashboards. Yeah, I think those are, definitely something that we want to implement, and it's great to see the examples here today. Limited scope services, currently talking about, well, how can we learn more about the outcomes of limited scope services? This seems like a hugely important question for legal services. We spend a lot of time providing assistance for people where we often just don't know the outcome, and so we are looking at ways that we can consider and experiment with service adjustments in ways that might enable us to get that kind of data more regularly. And then co-design and service user input. I think that there's obviously a lot of focus on evaluation. Once you've created a service, what do people think of it? Is it helpful? What kind of outcomes is it providing? I think there's also, particularly in other fields and in the legal community, a sort of growing sort of awareness that we can also engage people at the start, right? We can work with people to clients and communities to work out, get their input on how we might design our services. And I think that in some ways that can be a more effective and efficient way at getting our services right than sort of going through the whole evaluation process once we've already set up the service. So that to me seems like a big opportunity, but is definitely on the future goals slate right now, and not something that we're working on right now. So that is it from me. Thanks again for joining.
Great. Thanks so much, Pete. And thank you so much to our panel. That was amazing. I really appreciate you all taking the time. In the last 9 minutes, I think, we have some contact info here. I'm going to share these slides out after, so no worries on getting all the info down. I'm going to share this slide too. In terms of the chat and Q&A, we have a few questions. I think I was going to take one of them personally first, then we can go through them as a group. I think the panelists can all see all that info. One first question we got early on in the call was about how fantastic all these titles are and all these positions and folks are. But in the case when an organization doesn't have someone like these folks, what do they do? In the report, as Pete mentioned, we did see that, I think it was around 30% had someone like these folks. But otherwise, we saw that it tended to be rolled into other jobs, whether it's the directing attorney or, the development team, something like that, where people are kind of looking at and capturing and working on these kinds of issues. And then in terms of how is it paid, I don't think we captured that in the survey. I think that would be something interesting to find out, though, in terms of obviously how are organizations using their resources to focus on data and evaluation, to really use, obviously scarce resources to kind of engage in this circular loop of trying to maximize those resources in turn. The other thing I wanted to say was, obviously, there's a ton of interest in Power BI. It seems like Susan is our resident expert. Susan did drop an email in the chat for folks, and I'll if that's okay with Susan, I will highlight that in the post webinar email as well. Keep promoting that. And then I'll turn to my panel to see if anyone, any of these questions they want to take on. It looks like there was one specifically addressed to Shelby about sharing the staff survey. Shelby, did you want to address that one really quick?
I would be super happy to send that out. So Zach, maybe I can send it to you and
That'd be perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So another attendee said, I'm really intrigued by the idea of a dashboard showing case progress, but do you have problems with staff remembering to update as the case progresses? I'll send this to the whole panel.
I can jump in and others can jump in after me, I guess. So when we first rolled out the case milestones, part of it was that we were already collecting this data for a funder, and it was being collected in a spreadsheet, and there was definitely a delay and challenge getting people to enter their data in a timely manner. It improved a little bit when we put it into Justice Server because they're already in the case management system. It wasn't having to remember to go to this separate spreadsheet. But I think what really spurs people to action to enter their information is when they can see it with other people's information. So the dashboard, I think, has been really helpful for us to get people to enter their information, because then the dashboard is used, at team meetings, showing it up there. So, you're not going to feel great if you didn't get your information in there and it's not being presented to the team. So I think for us that the key is the data visualization.
I think that's our experience as well. Obviously, we've got some standardized information that gets entered at intake and then again at closing, but anything in the middle, unless you're going to be asked about it, is very tricky. And so having the visualizations, having the kind of structured time for check-ins with their managers or with the rest of their team that does kind of bring it to the forefront is really, I think, the only way that we've gotten those intermediate things to be entered in consistently. But then we do have a few staff that just really, really like to be able to stay on top of their own work and see what they're doing. And they actually liked, again, us giving them the option of having additional tools to kind of parse out what's on their plate at any given point to be able to more effectively prioritize their own work.
Yeah, I'll just add to, we actually worked on a project similar to this last year with a practice who had spreadsheets for managing things, and I mean it's not perfect, right? I don't think it ever would be, but like we have found that where the data tool actually enables people to provide better client service, right? That's a strong motivator. And so and to avoid kind of frustrations. So I have found that data quality tends to improve where it's saving people time and it's helping them give the service they want to give. Like that's a pretty strong motivator. And sometimes like people may not, you may have to explicitly say that, right, to make sure people make the connection and it doesn't just feel like another task that they have to do. That's my 2 cents.
Peter, just jumping in on that too. When I showed the kind of tool for our Stay Housed team, we were thinking for months about how do we get the level of tracking that we need on these calls, and how do we ask folks to fill in all these different points of information that would be useful for us. But we realized if we built it into a tool that would automate stuff for them, so they're not having to manually send emails, it's doing that for them. They're not having to manually, cross-reference multiple documents to figure out what they should do. Suddenly it became in their best interest, and it became, if the thing that you want people to do is the easiest thing for them to do, that's always the golden the thing you want if you can.
Great, thanks everybody. I'm not seeing any other questions that have not already been answered. There was one follow-up around legal server that I'm gonna chat with our team about, whether we have tried to kind of work with these types of platforms to get community-wide discounts or make it more accessible for smaller orgs. Because it sounds like it can, increase case management costs, of course. So I'm going to chat with my team to see if folks have attempted that in the past or what our kind of goals are around that. But that's a really good point in terms of just the fact that some of these programs and platforms obviously are more costly and how to kind of build that in. I just wanted to add quickly that in the report we did, and as I described, of course, one of the main impediments was staff capacity. And so kind of getting that staff buy-in up front is really essential to ensuring that, the data is consistent and quality, and it's kind of up to the standards that you want it to be. And also recognizing that, as everyone was saying, it's hard when it's just another task that somebody has to do within their already busy day of providing direct legal services and navigating all that, and then having to, input all that info. So making sure they, ultimately see the value of doing that, as apart from, of course, all the reporting requirements. But showing the impact seems like it can be helpful in that regard. Elby, I think we have one more question about the staff survey. Or maybe it was the same question. Was it mandatory for all employees? It seems like that's of interest to folks.
So it was anonymous, so we did not beat people over the head until we got the same number of people who turned it in as we have working here. But we still got about 106 responses out of 130 staff, and that's actually not including another 10 who got a new staff survey. So we don't make our newer staff members fill out the "how are we doing" survey. So I think that just sort of gentle reminders and making it not too onerous to fill out got us a lot of and reporting back to people, because I think they like to hear what everybody says. So not mandatory, but highly encouraged.
Great, thank you. So in the last minute, I'm just gonna plug a couple of things. We have a website where we're trying to kind of crowdsource information on access to justice and legal aid in general. Hopefully most of you have seen that page. There is a specific subtopic that focuses on data evaluation and measurement. So if anything that you have access to is not on there, please feel free to email it to me. My email is down at the bottom. If it's okay with the panelists, I'll probably add their emails so you can reach out if you have any further questions for them individually in my post-webinar email. And then the last thing is we do have as many of you probably know, a research and evaluation working group that meets kind of bi-monthly at this point. And folks can troubleshoot and share issues, and or this week we actually had a great presentation on a report that an org did. So it's just a space to kind of come together and work on these issues. Feel free to email me about that. But yes, so that's all we have. Thank you so much to our panel. I appreciate you all taking the time to do this and continue this conversation offline. Thank you, everybody.